This time, we'll be talking about components. Component is a part of design system. It gives us a one-point source global edit. A component is a reusable design element that can include a combination of shapes, texts, images, icons, and other visual interactive elements. They can be anything from buttons and navigation bars to entire sections of a user interface, helping to maintain a consistent design language and a speed up design process. We'll also be looking at there are several aspects from main, instant, override, next, the set, and the multiple. A main component, which sometimes is also referred to as master, is the initial version of the component that you create. Say for instance now, I want to create a component or I want to make an object a component. Of course, I'll certainly have to draw the object first. Say for instance, I'm using a rectangle. To make this object or this rectangle a component, there are quite a number of ways of which I can use any of them. It's either I go through the Figma main menu, objects, then click on create component, or I use these shortcut keys here, Ctrl plus Alt plus K, or I right click on the object and I choose this option here, create component, or on my option panel here, I can click on what? This quadruple diamond icon, of which most times I prefer using. As soon as I click on it, the only way I know that this object has been made a component is when I refer to my layer panel. On my layer panel, this rectangle that I made a component is showing a purple filled quadruple icon, meaning it's the master, it's the main. Now, let's look at what are instances. Instances are copies of the main component that you place throughout your design. As soon as I made this object, this rectangle, a component, if I check my asset panel, I will regularly see it here, rectangle 1. Now, what I'm saying here is called the instance. Now, you see that I click hold and drag it here. I've created an instance of the main, or from the main itself, I click hold and drag it here, holding Alt so as it duplicates. Also note that every time you make an object a component, it creates a frame for it. How do I know this? Refer to your layer panel. Now this object here, this it here. If I click on this arrow here, you are seeing now that the rectangle is inside the frame it created. Meaning now that if I try to change the color of this, I come to my fill and I say red. I'm trying to change the color, but I'm changing the frame color. Every time you come across or you make an object a component, instead of changing the frame color, of which I don't want now, I'm removing it, you enter the isolation, of which you can either use Ctrl and click, or you just go directly to your layer panel and click on the rectangle itself, that is the object inside the component. Now if I come back to my fill, I click on fill and I change it to a red color. Are you seeing a change here now? Now take note of also what has happened. Both instances, be it the one I took from the assets or the one I duplicated from the main itself, both of them change. And that's instance. And that's how main work along with instance. There's another distinguished difference between what? The main component and the instance. Now, if I click on the instance, take note of my layer panel, you'll see a single diamond icon beside it. If I click on what? The main, you see a what? A quadruple diamond icon that is fill purple. Let's see what override is talking about. Override is the ability to customize specific properties of an instance without affecting the main component or other instances. Now, take note of something. If I duplicate an instance, it's still an instance. See it? It's still an instance. If I duplicate the main, it's still an instance. Fine. Now, let me change the color of this instance I duplicate here. And I change it to, let's say, blue. Now, what I've done here is, by override, I've broken the color chain on this item alone. Say for instance, from the main component, if I click on it now, I come to color and I change it to blue. Every other, including the instance, change except of this object here that I broke the color chain because I just changed the color. But if I click on it and reduce the size, it still change. If I click on it and make it rounded, are you seeing now that the changes as of the main takes effect in all of them, apart from this one that its color remain the color I changed to? Say for instance, I want to break the chain of his corner roundedness. I click on it, I come to my corner radius, and say for instance I reduce it completely. If I come to the main, take note, it's either I control and click to enter the rectangle itself, not the frame, or I come to my main part here and I click on it, not the frame. Now, say for instance I change the roundedness now. Every other thing is taking change apart from this one. Now, as much as I can break its chain or its link, which is called override, I can also revert back to its what? To its original state by just right clicking on it. And if I come to this part that says reset all change, see what happens. Now it takes back the changes from the component, that is the main component itself. Say for instance, I want to break it completely from the main. If I right click on it and I say detach, by detaching it, it has no connection with this whatsoever. So if I click on it now, I come to my view, I change it, change the color to green. Every other thing changes, but this object does not change. Say for instance, I equally want to change its roundedness. I come in here, I reduce it. Every other thing change, but this one does not change. Say for instance, I increase the size. Every other thing took effect, but as much as I've detached an instance from its main, it no longer takes respective change. Let's see what nested is talking about. A nested component is talking about components that are contained in a framed selection. Say for instance, I have a rectangle here. I equally have an ellipse here. And I come here, I pick a polygon, that is a triangle here. If I make this object a component, I click on this quadruple icon, it's made. I click on this one, make. I click on the triangle and I say make. I've made 3 of them a component. Now, if I select the 3 of them and I say what? Right click and I say frame selection, by so doing, they are nested. So they are inside one frame. That's what nested component is talking about. Now, component sets. Component sets are alternative of the main. It can be one or more than one. Say for instance, I take a rectangle, I click, hold, and draw. I take an ellipse, I click, hold, and draw. Let me use a star this time around. Click, hold, and draw. This time, I just select them all. So if I come to this part of my option panel, you take note now that there's an arrow beside this quadruple icon that we conventionally click to make a component. Now if I click on this arrow now, you will notice we have three different types of options. Now, the last one in particular, if I click on create component sets, you will notice around these icons, there are dashed lines, meaning they are alternative of themselves. Being that the rectangle is on top, it will be regarded as the default component. On my asset panel, you take note now that the rectangle is the only one you are seeing as the what component, despite you have made it a component set. Every time you make several items a set of themselves, the one on top will be regarded as the main or default. If I click, hold and drag, this rectangle I've drawn is a sub or alternative of the circle or the star. If I refer to my design panel, take note of this part that says property 1 rectangle. If I click on it, I can change it to the other alternative I have. This is the star here. This is the ellipse here. If I still duplicate this one, it's still an instance of which I can switch to any of its alternative as much as it's inside this my dashed lines. I click on it. Any changes I make inside here with respect to their color, it takes change. Say for instance, I'm switching this to a rectangle that I just made. Are you seeing it? And that's what component set is talking about. Now, multiple components. It's talking about instead of making several objects that you want to make component one by one, you can have them all selected and make it multiple components. That is, you make them components. So they are components on their own. So say for instance, I click on my rectangle, click, hold and draw a polygon this time around, and then a star. Instead of clicking on star and coming here make component, click on polygon and say make component, click on rectangle and say make component. I can have them all selected, and here I click on create multiple components. Now the thing is, if I click on this one now on my layer panel, you can notice that it has its own quadruple diamond icon. The same thing for the polygon, the same thing for the star, which is saying now that they are component on their own. It's different from component sets. They are not alternative of themselves. That's why if you check my design panel, you can't see any part of properties. So you don't have an alternative to change to. Now, let's quickly create a button and see how we get to apply this whole component thing. So say for instance, I'm making a submit button. I click on my type tool, click and type submit. I've typed submit. I want to make it an auto layout, so I could have a frame around it. So let me increase the paddings on both sides, the left, right, and the top. If I've had like this, and of course, I want to put a fill inside. I want to change the color to give me contrast. And let me make the edges rounded, a little rounded. Let me change the color of the text to be white. Instead of isolating, I can come in here and change it to white. Now, I think I'm fine like this. Now, let's just go through the several things we've done, making this button a component. I just click on this quadruple icon. I've made it a component. Now, if I duplicate, this duplicate is the instance. Any change I make from the master, takes effect on the instance. Are you seeing the change? Say for instance now, I still duplicate this one, the instance. If I change the color of the frame from green to, say for instance, red, it still takes effect on both instances. Now, the part of override is if, for instance, now I change the submit to retrieve. I've overridden the content with respect to the exact text here. But see what happens if I change the color of this text to yellow. That is the main. Are you seeing that despite I change the color from submit to retrieve, it still has the same change from the main? If, for instance, I still increase my paddings from the main, are you seeing the same change still take effect? If I have it like that set now, let's see how we get to use this button explaining the properties of components. As of date, we have four major component properties, from the instant swap to text to boolean, then variants. Now let's see how we get to apply them here. Instant swap is a function of nested components, as it's here in short term to switch or change icon. Now let's refer back to this our submit button here. Say for instance I'm supposed to put an icon beside it. Let me take a polygon. Let me take an ellipse and then a triangle. I want to make them fit in here appropriately, so let me take note of the height of submit, that is, of which is 68. So I can click on this one and come in here, ensuring here is locked, that is my aspect ratio, and type 68. Come in here and type 68. Come in here and type 68. If I'm good, I select all of them. I want to make it a nested component. I select all of them and come in here and say what? Create multiple components. So I select all of them, right click on it and ensure that they are framed. That is frame selection. You may choose to rename the frame name. On my layer panel, double click on frame 3 and choose icons and press enter. As it is now, they are components alone, not of themselves. They are not alternative to another. No. They are just nested. They are in the same umbrella. That's what the frame is suggesting, not variable of themselves as it is now. But now, in creating this instance swap, the next thing I do is, say for instance, I just copy any of this icon. That is, I want to put it inside here. You know, if I'm copying, what I'm getting is the instance. So Control C, double click on submit, ensure that what is selected like this, Control V, and you take note that is appearing at the other side of T. And if you want to bring it to the front, you can click, hold and drag. As much as it's auto layout, it will work just fine. I've created a button with an icon. Now, instant swap is saying now that as much as they are nested together, I can switch them if I define this icon as an instant swap. Now, if I click on this icon now, I head straight to my design panel. Now you take note of this icon that is telling me create instant swap property. So if I click on it once, a dialog box appears. Now it's telling me now that what name do you want this property be defined as? I delete what is there. I conventionally prefer to use something like this. Change icon. Now preferred values. I can click on plus On the convention that if you see now that my frame, that is the other icons are inside icons, and yet under my CTA buttons, that is this frame here, I can click every options I want inside it. I can check it. I want this one, then I want this one. Now if I'm done, I click on create property. As soon as I create it, say for instance now, I have this as my main now, I duplicate it here. If I click on it now, are you seeing this part that is saying change icon? I can choose to change it to the rectangle and it changes. I can choose to change it to the ellipse and it changes. Are you seeing how I've gone about it? The first thing I do is, or I did is, ensuring that these three components are under one frame. The next thing is I copied one inside this button. The one I copy is an instance of which is subject to change from the master. Now, duplicating the instance, that is creating the instance of which I can equally come to my assets, click, hold, and drag. I can then come to my what? Design panel and choose to change the icon to rectangle. Choose to change the icon to ellipse, depending on what I prefer. There's also the text property, and it indicates which text layer should be edited. Now, say for instance now, if I go straight to my main components, another way I can go, for instance, this is the main component of which I know because I created it here. And this is the instance, these are instance. There'll be some scenarios where you are trying to locate which is main, which is instance. Of course, I've told you how to identify it by clicking on it on your design panel, of which I can see my quadruple diamond filled purple icon. But on the same vein, if I right click on this instance, I say go to to main components, it takes me straight here. That is by the way. If I say return to instance, it takes me back. Now, the part of text property now, I can define this text here as a label. How? Instead of me having to edit the text directly from here, I can choose my change to be done at the design panel. If I head straight to the main components, I double click on submit itself. On this my design panel, the section for text, you'll notice there's an icon that is called create text property. So if I click on it, a dialog box pops up. Now, say for instance, I delete it. I want to have it in a name that I can refer or relate. I say change texts. Value is like saying the initial label you see there. I click on create property. Now if I come back to my instances, you will notice now that there's a part that is on my frame that is called change text. Instead of coming here to edit submit, I can from this point change it to retrieve. I press enter and it changes. If I duplicate this instance now, I can come in here stream and change it to close. I press enter and it changes. And that's for text property. The Boolean property is saying hide or show selection, text or icon. How do this part works? It means now that in this our button that we've designed here, I can choose to hide either the icon or the text. How do I go about it? The first thing is I double click on the one I want to create this property on. Say for instance the icon now. I head straight to my layer panel. The first thing is I double click on the icon I want to make Boolean property on. Then I head straight to my design panel. On the layer section, I click on this icon here saying create Boolean property. This dialog box pops up. On the convention of which I can relate to, I delete it and I say show icon. Since this is a positive affirmation, I say true. If it were a negative affirmation, I can say hide icon and ensure it is false. In a way you can relate to, use a word that you can conventionally relate with here. I can change it back to show and then ensure that what it's true. If I click on create property, say for instance, I want to do the same thing for the text too. I click on the text, come to the section of layer on my design panel, click on it. Now, because I've created a property before, which is what show icon, of which I don't want to put this my submit under, I have to create a different property for the submit. If I click on create property now, the same dialog box appear. Now instead of show submit, I say show text, of which is true. If I click on create property, it's showing me I've created that property there. If I click on the icon, it's on the property of change icon. Now let's see what we have. If I click on any of these my instances, now you see the part that says show icon. If I turn it off, are you seeing now it's no longer there? If I turn it on, if I turn the text off, if I turn it on, are you seeing it? On any of them, I have that leverage. Now, the variant property allows you to define attributes of your variants, such as or with respect to state, color, or size. Say for instance, if I click on this icon here now, I want to make a variant with respect to color, because it's not every button that has the same change or the same state. Now, one way I can create properties, if I head straight to my option panel, I click on create add variants. On the first note, as it is here, both of them are main components. On the second note, they are alternative of themselves. Now, the only way I get to see this property is when I make a difference to the other. For instance, now this second one that I've created, click on it, come into my design panel, just have the color changed, say to a blue, a dark blue, and I'm okay here. Any of these my buttons can be subject to change of either of what I have here. If I click on this one here, and you take note that you are seeing a section here in the frame that is called default, of which I can change the name. But if I click on the arrow there and I say change to variant 2, are you seeing that the icons, the shape remain the same, and yet it has changed to variant? So I click on this retrieve and say now I want to change it to variant 2. Are you seeing the change? Let's say I want to add another variant. I click on this one and I say what? Add. I click on this plus here. It had another variant. Let me reduce the size with respect to paddings. I reduce the paddings and let me reduce the text. And let me reduce the size of the icon. Ensure here is locked. Come here. I want to change the color to something different. And let me have it green this time around. And I'm cool. Now, any of these buttons here can be subject to change of any of these buttons here. So if I click on this one now, I head straight to my design panel on this section called frame. If I click on it now and say change to default, it changes. Change to variant 3, you see it changes. If I click on change to what variant 2, it changes. As much as I have that, in a way to properly recognize or differentiate these different buttons, if I click on the first one on my design panel here, see this part that is called property 1, you can highlight the option you are seeing there and change it to active. Click on the second one and change it to this part where I'm seeing variant 2, change it to inactive. If I click on the third one, I change it to small. Now, if I click on any of these now, if I come here now, I can see the names I've created. I click on this, I can see the names I've created to active, to inactive, to small. Are you seeing that? In a way to look at everything we've done so far, right from the instance swap to text property to Boolean, then variant. If I click on any of them, say I even duplicate again, of which is an instance, this one I've created, I can say let it be what? The inactive states. Let it be small. I don't want text to show there. The icon to be showing there, it should be what? The polygon. And if I want text to show, I don't want the icon to show. Are you seeing how easily I controlled this button from one point? Say for instance, I don't want the text close there. I highlight it, I say what? Open. Press enter. Are you seeing it? So this is how much components can help you achieve. I'll show you how to apply the idea of components in creating something like this in the shortest possible time. See you in the next video.